My what?
Make sure your phone's on silent.
Oh. It rang. So it might be you.
This would be the second time it's happened.
That's okay.
Mm-hmm.
So doesn't matter if the viewers come on. So I figured we'll just start it. Is that good? And then we'll go from there. Okay. So you're going to be my one audience. So today we're going to talk about critical analysis. So my first question is, what do you know about critical analysis? When I say the term, what do you mean? What do you think it means?
Well, I think critical analysis, I think being able to analyze a piece for its mechanical elements,
Right.
rather than any type of emotional pull.
Right. Okay. So when you're doing critical analysis, often is kind of a redundant term. If you're analyzing, you should be being critical. But really, what we want to think about is how do we package it. And so you're on the right track. The idea is that we have what is critical analysis. First of all, it's argumentative. And when we say argumentative, it means it takes a position, right? So you know what a thesis statement is, right?
Mm-hmm.
So a thesis statement is really a position statement. You're taking a position on something. So it's not simply reporting it. It's actually saying, okay, I've analyzed it. And this is the conclusion that I've come to. And this is how I'm going to show you how to come to that conclusion. It's evaluative, and that's part of argumentative because it's not simply summarizing. It's saying, okay, there is summary as a part of critical analysis, because of course you have to summarize the information. But it's evaluating evidence and the information that we have at hand. And then finally, what it is reflective, because really, have you ever learned the classical argumentative structure?
I believe I've been reviewed on it half a dozen times.
So you basically, when you talk about classical argumentative structure, it is classical, but it's the setup of you have your introduction, which really has your thesis statement, right? And then you have a contextual background, right? So that's the narrative part. In Greek, they call that narratio, or it's the so what question. Okay, so here's the contextualized component, or this is why it's important, right? And then you have the evidence, but then you have, in a lot of argumentative structures, you have what the classical argument called refutatio, which is refutation, which is really about producing the opposing arguments. Right? And why is that? Why do you think that if you're arguing something, why would you include opposing arguments in it?
That's usually to help the credibility of what you're putting out there.
Right. It's credibility, and it's also showing that you kind of examine all of the information and not simply looking at stuff that agrees with what you think, but you're also looking at the opposing arguments. So it's not only about credibility, but it's about you having a more comprehensive understanding of the topic, right? And then finally, of course, you have your conclusion, which a lot of people end up doing is they just summarize what's already been said. But really, a conclusion should be a call to action, right? So what should somebody who's walking away from this do with it, right? So I make an argument that aspirin shouldn't be used in children under the age of 2, right? Okay, so why is that? Well, here's the evidence. Here's the medical data that shows it has these certain impacts. Here are some things that people believe that it's an argument against, but at the end, right, when I'm concluding, what I'm really trying to get you to do is to not give aspirin to children under 2. It's like, this is the call to action. This is what you're supposed to do. And it kind of goes back to the beginning of the so what. It's like, so really a critical analysis is not simply about analyzing, but it's about providing the context to which your reader is supposed to be doing. And it could be as simple as thinking differently about a topic, right? You're offering a different reading of a topic that maybe hasn't been produced before. So for example, in my own research, one of the things I argue is that we should reframe the metaphors we use to talk about plagiarism and talk about the plagiarist as a trickster figure, right? Because of all this digital literacy, that the fact is that a lot of the habits that are embedded in digital literacy, like copying and pasting and reblogging and retweeting and all those social media habits, are plagiaristic to a certain extent. And so what it does is, if we look at the plagiarist and the trickster, then we might be able to reframe how we talk about plagiarism. Does that make sense? So I'm analyzing what's the conversation at hand and saying, okay, here's a different way of reading it. And so there's all these different ways of analyzing something. Does that make sense to you?
Actually, it does, because as you mentioned with the social media reblogging example, depending on how you look at it, you can also see it as a method of basically extra advertisement for the original blog on the condition that the original blog is credited.
Yeah. And also, I mean, and it is a different way of citing something, right? It's not the traditional citation that we learn in school, like MLA and all that, but it is still a form of citation. When you reblog something, that the original source often is there. Does that make So basically, that was my critical analysis, using everything I have at hand. And then what I did was like, okay, we should reread this thing with this metaphor. So it doesn't simply have to be like, don't give aspirin to children under 2. It could be something that's, more complex. We need to have another conversation that uses this. What critical analysis, of course, is not is, and this is where a lot of people, not only students, but they tend to want to fall in summary. So like you have an assignment where it's asking you to take 2 songs and put them together and to try to see how they interact, how they're in conversation. And a lot of times people just summarize what the songs are about and not really talk about how they're connected. It's not imitation, so you don't want to imitate, and analysis is not opinion. Even I can analyze something and actually come up with an argument that's against my own opinion. Right? So to try to avoid those, that falling into, well, this is what I think or this is what I feel, because those feeling words, those thinking words, really aren't productive when it comes to analysis. And so I actually have a way of thinking about it, which is, I call it the SAFE method, and this is in PowerPoint. I say there's the way to protocolize it or turn it into a procedure is to say, and I'm going to make sure that we have 2 viewers. Hi. So the PowerPoint has basically 4 parts. One is summarize the material. So you will often, no matter if you're doing analysis, you will often have summary as part of what you're doing, because you have to give somebody the information.
I'm assuming this is typically grouped in with the evidence.
Right. And so, for example, and we're going to look at a YouTube example in a minute. For example, if you're talking about, let's say we're going back to my example about trickster, when I do the plagiarism, as to think of the plagiarist as a trickster figure, I actually have to summarize like what people have said about the trickster figure. Like I can't, it's not only me using it as evidence, but I have to kind of summarize the scholarship around it so it makes sense. So you need to make sure it's coherent and it's connected, but it shouldn't overwhelm your document. Like if I were mathematically kind of going to give you a mathematical formulation, summary should mean no more than like 5% of the document's length. Right, that's all. So if you have a 1,000-word essay that you're doing, make sure that your summaries occupy no more than like between 50 and 100 words. Right. The next thing is analyze. When I say analyze, I'm using it in this way. You analyze a document. Let's say you have a piece of evidence. You need to analyze it for its strengths, right? So you need to look how it's logically connected, how it's, how these pieces of evidence are put together, and do they make sense? The second thing when you're looking at evidence and you're doing a critical analysis is to make sure that you include your find fallacies, right? So when I say find fallacies, it means where are the weaknesses, right? So when you're looking at something and you're critically analyzing it, what is it that this thing doesn't do? I call them the what the hell moments, WTH moments, because oftentimes you'll be reading something and all of a sudden you'll sit there and go, well, what? I don't understand where that came from. How did that? And often it's not so much that you don't understand. Sometimes it's just bad writing or there's a breakdown in the logic. And that's where you, as somebody who's analyzing a piece of material, can say, okay, let's go back and say, why did I have that right? Why couldn't I follow that? And then start to see that might be a weakness in the actual piece of evidence that you're looking at. Okay? And then finally, evaluating, right? And evaluating, people are like, well, what do you mean by evaluating? I mean, for me, it's a simple measure. You take the things that are strongest about the document, and then those things are weakest, and you measure them. And whatever comes up the heaviest is really where the evaluation is happening, right? So if you're looking at it and there's a lot of strength to the argument, then at the end of the day, if those outweigh the weaknesses, then you're evaluating it and weighing it as a strong argument that makes these particular points, right? Now, on the other hand, if it falls apart, then the evaluation is it's a weak argument or it's a weak piece of evidence because it doesn't do these things, right? Does that make sense? So it's kind of a calculus of critical analysis. So what I want to do is I actually want to watch a video, and I want us, and for those who are online, if you go to YouTube and you type in PBS Idea Channel, Deadpool, you'll come up with the link to the episode that we're going to watch right now. So let's see. Well, here we go.
I was just curious.
Okay, so we're going to watch about 5 minutes of this. And what I'd like you to do is I want you to do this. I want you to identify what you think the thesis is. All right? Have you?
Oh my God, you hit a very sweet spot for me in terms of analysis. I'm very well versed with the character, so I'm very interested.
Okay, well, good. So I want you to identify what his thesis is. What evidence is he using, right? Is the evidence relevant? And if so, how is it relevant? What kind of evidence is he using? And then finally, I want you to identify how he's organizing his argument, right? And so I'm going to show you about 4 to 5 minutes of this, and then we're going to come back and I want you to tell me what you think, what your answers are to those questions. And for those who are viewing online, if you'd like to follow along, that'd be great. So remember, it's what is the thesis? What is the position? What are the pieces of evidence that he's using? And how is he using them? And then finally, how is he organizing the argument? And remember, if you go to YouTube, just click in Deadpool PBS Idea Channel. It's an Idea Channel. It's basically a weekly YouTube episodes hosted by Mike Rugnetta. So if you want to, we're going to start this video. Oh, let me make sure it's. Uh-oh. Let me make sure. Hold on a second. Right there, Chantel. I started playing it.
No audio.
No audio. Maybe it's this. I bet that is it. Okay. Nope. Let me show you. Because I know it was playing for Michaela.
Relationship with his own body.
Is that okay?
That's fine.
So I'm going to go back to the beginning. It's important that we do
This
it.
episode of Idea Channel is brought to you by Linda. It's amazing what you can get away with.
Okay.
Deadpool knows he's a comic book character because of his unique relationship with his own body. This episode of Idea Channel is brought to you by Linda. It's amazing what you can get away with when you think nobody's watching. and also what you give yourself permission to do when you know that you have an audience. And you would probably think that both of these states are mutually exclusive, and they are for most people. But Deadpool isn't most people, and I think he'd be the first to tell you that directly. At the heart of what makes Deadpool work as a character, and work so well, are some deeply complicated dualisms like this one, which I want to try to explore. But before we do, for the unfamiliar, some background. So before Deadpool, aka Wade Wilson, was Ryan Reynolds, he was Cable's nemesis in an early 90s Marvel series created by Fabian Nicieza and Rob Liefeld. By the mid-90s, he had his own self-titled series. By the late 90s, he was a picture of the Marvel Universe, having transitioned via several writers, most notably Joe Kelly, to a kind of slapstick anti-hero parody of the grim darkness found throughout comics. Today, it would be an understatement to say he's a fan favorite. Oh, and by the way, we have a new set. We're going to unveil the whole thing. Anyway, his popularity may be a little surprising given that Deadpool has, at first glance at least, kind of a standard loadout of superhero abilities. He's got superhuman strength, agility, world-class combat skills, which essentially add up to the oh-so-distinctive characteristic of good at fighting, which is not exactly Eisner Award-winning material. More notably, like fellow Canuck Wolverine, Deadpool is a product of the infamous Weapon X program, which means he has a healing factor that's based on Wolverine's, but in comparison, Deadpool's is exceptional. It keeps everything from injury and dismemberment to cancer from killing him. He just will not die. His most defining feature, though, isn't his substantial physical capability, but his wit. Nicknamed the Merc with the Mouth, Deadpool is a wisecracking, guff-given, insult-curling, red-clad source of constant commentary. However, Deadpool's quips aren't quite like, say, Hawkeye's, who has something to say about everything, but not everything. By which I mean Deadpool knows, or according to who you ask, thinks, he's a comic book character. Deadpool will often comment on the gutter between panels. He'll react to particularly gross onomatopoeia. He will reference and even sometimes directly address the nice people reading his book. Deadpool knows what his context is. He can sense somehow the complete frame of his own existence. This is Deadpool's definitive power. It's what makes Deadpool Deadpool. Arguably what allows him to put his other abilities to such effective use is this sense. And I want to talk about how I think it works. Specifically, I think in addition to being a physical and mental adept, Deadpool is also a phenomenological. Phenomenology is a branch of philosophy concerned with describing human experience, specifically in relationship to perception and the existence of the world. It's all about how the world around us is a result of our sensations, not the other way around. Phenomenology is the domain of many well-known thinkers, but 20th century French philosopher Maurice Merleau-Ponty is who we're going to draw from the most, specifically his book Phenomenology of Perception. Phenomenology posits that reality is comprised of phenomena, events and objects that are perceived by people. Everything we perceive is organized into what Merleau-Ponty sometimes calls the text of reality by our consciousness via experience. But okay, what counts as experience? First, there's our senses, the big five, but it doesn't stop there. Thinking and imagining are also experiences. Emotions, too. Desiring something is an experience that you have of that thing. Memories, sentiment, literal and emotional feeling, making meaning with language. You know, experience. The sum total of all of our possible senses, perceptions, and experiences directed at and responding to phenomena in the world comprise reality. This is our phenomenological frame. You can also think of it kind of like sonar. Metaphysically, the world is a very dark place, and our consciousness sends out and receives back various modes of perception which construct the lay of the land from the darkness, give it meaning. So what we're going to try to do is explain how Deadpool's perceived reality is different because his experiences and therefore consciousness are also different. To start down that road, though, we got to believe, or at least form the belief, that he possesses perceptions and a consciousness in his own world. I think he does, and I think we treat most fictional characters as though they do. If you don't want to attribute agency and consciousness to fictional characters, then talking about how and why Deadpool is the way he is becomes really simple. The reasons are texture. He's a smartass because Rob Liefeld thought it would be funny. Deadpool has 3 separate inner voices because it is tons of work for the staff to write and draw a whole other character. So Deadpool becomes his own fractured straight man.
So I'm going to stop it
Deadpool
here.
knows he's fictional because
And
the comic.
So, what is the thesis?
The thesis is that Deadpool's a unique character because he is aware of himself, basically self-aware in whatever media he's in.
Okay. And so, and it's because he's aware of his own body, right? That was, so the very first frame of this video is the thesis statement, right?
I actually have the exact wording where Deadpool knows he's a comic book character because of his unique relationship with his body.
Right. And so so you had the thesis, right? So what evidence is he using to make his argument?
First of all, one of the big pieces is that Deadpool usually makes some sort of fourth wall breaking comment at some point within whichever medium he's in, video games, comic book, etc., etc. Additionally, he also treats himself as such.
So he's aware, and he lives as if he's off the page. So because he's aware that he's in the page. Okay. So and what is he basing this argument on?
He's basing this argument on the repetitive use of Deadpool within as fourth wall breaking.
Right. He's using, that's part of it, but what else is he basing it on? He's using phenomenology, right?
Phenomenology.
So he's using this philosophy because at the very end, what is he doing is he's presenting the reading that would basically argue against him. Well, if you don't want to read it this way, then you can read it as a textual reading. So he's kind of giving a voice to what somebody might object to. It's like, well, why are you reading it this way? But he's using phenomenology as a frame, right? So he has several pieces of evidence here. He has the actual textual evidence, right? But then he's analyzing it by using this particular philosophy. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So you have like 2 strains of evidence going on here. You have the actual evidence coming from the source material, and then you have this external source that he's using in order to bring to bear this argument. One of the interesting things is what does he do at the very beginning, after the thesis? What does he do? What does he do for the viewer?
He puts on a Deadpool mask.
Right, he puts on a Deadpool mask, but then he kind of goes through Deadpool's history, right? Deadpool started out as this character created by this person, then got his own series, and then so really what he did there was like a 1-minute summary, right? He summarized it, but then he moved on into the analysis. Okay, for those who don't know Deadpool, here's the history, here's a summary of Deadpool, and then here's the argument I'm making. So do you see how that's kind of like starting to, and so this is an example of a critical analysis. Right? This is an example of how to kind of put together a critical analysis using not only a text material, the Deadpool, but also bringing in an outside text phenomenology, and a particular one, the phenomenology of perception by Conti, to come to bear on it. Does that make sense? So this is a great example of a critical analysis. Now, of course, what you have to do is think about, well, how is this written? Of course, it's in a multimedia form. It has GIFs. I mean, the great thing is like GIFs are actually evidence too, so this is multimedia, but you could textualize this and turn this into an essay, and it would still be as effective. So, does that help? In thinking about how critical analysis works? So what we're going to do is we're moving away from guided practice into artifact-based practice, and that is, are there any questions that you particularly have? And thank you for joining us. I'm actually going to stop the broadcast now since it's going to move to us. So what questions do you have?